Behind the cold gray walls of Sing Sing, more than 200 years of American history whisper stories of crime, punishment, and redemption, a place where some of the nation's most feared men met their fate. To understand Sing Correctional Facility, we must step back into the early 19th century, a time when America was rapidly expanding, cities were growing, and crime was beginning to spread through the urban streets of New York. It was the year 1825, and the state of New York faced a critical problem. Its prisons were overcrowded, inefficient, and failing to reform the men they confined. The Auburn prison, located upstate, had been the model of the time, strict, silent, and regimented. But even that system was bursting at the seams. The state needed a new, stronger, and more disciplined facility. The site chosen was along the east bank of the Hudson River in a quiet village called Ossining, about 30 miles north of New York City. Back then, the area was known by its Native American name, Sinck, belonging to the Sinck tribe that once lived along the river. This name, meaning stone upon stone, would soon take on a hauntingly literal meaning as prisoners began to carve the first granite blocks that would form the foundation of one of America's most feared prisons, Sing Sing. The construction of the prison itself is a story of punishment and endurance. It wasn't built by hired laborers or architects, but by inmates from the Auburn prison. These men, shackled and watched closely by guards, were brought to ossining and ordered to quarry stone from the very land they stood on. They lived in makeshift wooden huts as they worked, day after day, splitting massive slabs of granite by hand. Each stone they cut was both a piece of the new prison and a symbol of the harsh discipline that defined early American corrections. Under the direction of Captain Elam Linz, a former Army officer known for his iron will and harsh discipline, construction began in the summer of 1825. Linz was a strict believer in the Auburn system, which enforced absolute silence among prisoners. Men could not speak, could not look at each other, and were forced to march in lockstep wherever they went. The idea was that through silence, labor, and discipline, criminals could be reformed, or at the very least, broken of their defiance. Within a year, the first cell block was completed. It contained 800 tiny cells, each barely large enough for one man to stand, lie down, or turn around. There were no windows, no plumbing, and no light, just stone, iron, and darkness. When the first group of prisoners was transferred there in 1826, the world began to hear the name, Sing Sing. It quickly became a symbol of fear. The phrase, "sent up the river," soon entered popular speech, referring to those who were shipped up the Hudson from New York City to serve time in Sing Sing's cold, unforgiving walls. Despite its grim reputation, Sing Sing was considered a model of efficiency in its early years. Visitors from across the United States, and even from Europe, came to study its design and management. The prison's orderly silence and strict discipline were seen as proof that even the most dangerous men could be controlled through the right system of authority and punishment. Yet beneath this facade of order lay a world of suffering. Prisoners endured brutal punishments for the smallest infractions: lashes, solitary confinement, and deprivation of food or light. There was no mercy and no appeal. By the mid-1800s, Sing Sing had grown into more than a prison. It was a national symbol of American justice, and of the fine line between reform and cruelty. Its stone walls, built by the hands of the condemned, stood as both a fortress and a warning. Every block of granite told a story, of labor, discipline, and the state's determination to tame human nature through fear and control. Before Sing Sing became a prison that echoed with the footsteps of guards and the clanging of iron doors, it was a quiet, fertile land along the Hudson River, inhabited by the Sinck, a Native American tribe from the Wappinger Confederacy. These early inhabitants lived peacefully along the riverbanks, relying on the land's natural abundance. The name Sinck, in their language roughly translated to stone upon stone, or place of stones, a reference to the area's rugged terrain and its plentiful limestone and granite deposits. Ironically, these same stones would later be quarried by prisoners to build the very institution that would bear the tribe's name for centuries. In every era, the name carried weight. It reminded society that beneath the peaceful river towns of New York flowed a deeper current, one of history, humanity, and the long struggle between wrongdoing and redemption. The name Sing Sing, once belonging to a quiet tribe, became one of the most enduring titles in America's story of law and punishment, a name carved forever into the nation's collective memory. If the walls of Sing Sing could speak, their most haunting stories would come from the years when death itself lived within the prison, when the sound of footsteps down a long corridor meant only one thing: someone was being led to the execution chamber. For more than 70 years, Sing Correctional Facility was home to the state's electric chair, grimly nicknamed Old Sparky. From 1891 to 1963, over 600 men and women were executed here, making Sing Sing one of the most active execution sites in American history. The electric chair, first introduced as a modern and supposedly more humane alternative to hanging, became both a symbol of technological progress and a terrifying final instrument of justice. The irony was bitter. A machine designed to bring swift and painless death became a source of dread and debate for decades. The first execution at Sing Sing took place on July 7, 1891, when a man named William Kemmler was put to death for murder. The process was brutal and imperfect. The voltage failed to kill him instantly, and witnesses were horrified by what they saw. Yet the state continued to believe in electricity as the future of capital punishment. Soon, executions became almost routine, performed behind heavy doors, witnessed only by officials, reporters, and clergy. The names of those executed at Sing Sing read like a dark ledger of America's criminal history. Some were unknown men whose crimes were forgotten soon after their deaths. Others became infamous, their trials sensationalized, their final moments broadcast across newspapers. Among the most well-known were Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a husband and wife convicted of passing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War. Their execution on June 19, 1953, drew global attention. Supporters believed they were victims of political hysteria, while others saw them as traitors who endangered the nation. On that summer night, the lights in Sing Sing flickered as the current surged through Ethel Rosenberg's body, a chilling image that burned itself into the public consciousness. Their deaths became one of the most controversial moments in American justice, debated for generations afterward. Another infamous figure to face Old Sparky was Albert Fish, an elderly serial killer whose crimes were so gruesome that even hardened prison guards struggled to describe them. When Fish was executed in 1936, witnesses claimed he smiled and welcomed death, calling it a thrill. It was moments like these that gave Sing Sing its fearsome reputation, a place where the most terrifying criminals met their end under a crown of electricity. Yet for every notorious killer or spy who died there, countless others were poor, desperate men, immigrants, laborers, and drifters, whose executions rarely made headlines. To the state, they were statistics. To the prison, they were the next name on the list. Each death, however, added another ghost to Sing Sing's long and shadowed history. Executions took place in a small, windowless chamber within the prison walls. The condemned were walked from their cells through a narrow passage known as the last mile. Outside, the night would be silent except for the hum of the Hudson River. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of ozone and fear. Witnesses described how the guards moved with solemn precision, a grim ritual that repeated itself hundreds of times over the decades. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, public opinion in New York began to shift. Many questioned whether the death penalty truly served justice or merely continued a cycle of violence. When the final execution was carried out in 1963, the electric chair was finally retired. Old Sparky was dismantled and stored away, but its legacy remained, etched into the very soul of Sing Sing. Even today, when visitors tour the old prison museum or watch documentaries about its history, the stories of those who died in that chamber linger. The silence of those moments still seems to echo through the corridors, a chilling reminder that for decades, Sing Sing wasn't just a place of imprisonment, but a place of final judgment. Over the course of 2 centuries, Sing Correctional Facility has held some of the most dangerous, notorious, and fascinating inmates in American criminal history. Its cells have confined mob bosses, spies, killers, con artists, and even celebrities, each one leaving behind a story that added another layer to the prison's dark legend. Within these thick stone walls, fame and fear often shared the same space. From the early 1900s through the mid-20th century, Sing Sing became a revolving door for figures whose names filled newspaper headlines. It was a time when crime stories captivated the public imagination, and Sing Sing stood as the final destination for many of those tales. To the average New Yorker, the phrase "he's gone up to Sing Sing" meant that a criminal's fate was sealed. Yet for many inmates, their stories didn't end in silence. They became part of the mythology surrounding this infamous place. One of the earliest and most notorious inmates was Charles Becker, a New York City police lieutenant convicted of orchestrating the murder of a gambler named Herman Rosenthal in 1912. Becker's case shocked the nation. He was the first American police officer ever executed for murder. His trial was drenched in corruption, scandal, and media frenzy. When he was led to the electric chair in 1915, hundreds gathered outside the prison gates, some praying, others cheering. Becker's death turned Sing Sing into a symbol of justice, and of the growing public fascination with true crime. In later years, the prison housed a long list of infamous mobsters who dominated New York's criminal underworld. Members of Murder Incorporated, the organized crime group that carried out assassinations for the mafia, were regular visitors to its cells. Names like Louis Lepka Buchalter, the only major mob boss ever executed by the federal government, made headlines when they arrived at Sing Sing. These men had once controlled vast networks of illegal operations, gambling, racketeering, and contract killings. Inside Sing Sing, however, their power meant nothing. The same iron bars that confined petty thieves also confined the kings of organized crime. But Sing Sing wasn't just a home for mobsters and murderers. It also held some of America's most infamous psychopaths and serial killers. One of the most chilling was David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam. In the 1970s, Berkowitz terrorized New York City by killing 6 people and wounding several others, claiming that a demon-possessed dog commanded him to kill. When he was finally captured, he was sent to Sing Sing before being transferred to other state facilities. For a time, his presence there reignited public fear and fascination with the prison's reputation for housing the most dangerous of men. Among these criminals were also the innocent or controversial cases, individuals whose convictions sparked debates about justice and morality. The Rosenbergs, whose story was tied to the Cold War and atomic espionage, were among the most famous of these. Their deaths inside Sing Sing's electric chair transformed the prison from a local institution into a global headline. Despite its harshness, Sing Sing was also a place of transformation for some inmates. Over the years, several well-known prisoners found religion, education, or art within its walls. Some became writers, poets, and activists, using their sentences to reflect on the human condition. In the 20th century, the prison's rehabilitation and education program gave rise to stories of redemption that contrasted sharply with the violence of its past. The mix of fame and infamy gave Sing Sing a strange dual identity. It was both a stage for America's most publicized punishments and a laboratory for its attempts at reform. The prison's roster read like a grim celebrity list. Men who ruled streets, corrupted systems, or haunted nightmares, now reduced to numbers and schedules behind bars. Every high-profile inmate brought the world's attention back to those gray stone walls. Reporters waited outside the gates, families wept, and crowds gathered whenever a new figure of notoriety arrived. Each story, whether of guilt, power, or redemption, became another thread in the long, complex history of Sing Sing. For much of its early history, Sing Correctional Facility was a place defined by silence, fear, and punishment. Its gray stone walls were not just barriers, they were instruments of control. Inside, discipline ruled every corner and mercy was rarely seen. The prison operated under a simple philosophy: obedience through suffering. In the 19th century, when Sing Sing first opened its gates, the idea of rehabilitation barely existed. Prisoners were treated not as men capable of change, but as examples of failure, to be broken down, disciplined, and reshaped through hardship. Life inside was harsh from the moment a new inmate arrived. Heads were shaved, personal belongings confiscated, and names replaced with numbers. Each prisoner was stripped not only of freedom but of identity itself. The cells were small, narrow spaces of stone, barely 7 feet long and 3 feet wide. There was no running water, no heat, and no comfort. In the dead of winter, the cold from the Hudson River would creep through the cracks in the walls, chilling men to the bone. In summer, the air was suffocating, thick with the smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, and despair. Prisoners slept on hard wooden planks or straw mattresses, often infested with vermin. The daily routine was designed to crush individuality. At dawn, guards would sound the bell and prisoners would rise in silence. They marched in lockstep, eyes down, forbidden to speak. Even glancing at another inmate could lead to punishment. Meals were eaten in silence, labor was performed in silence, and prayers were said in silence. It was known as the Auburn system, a method that relied on absolute quiet and rigid discipline to enforce obedience. Work was the heart of life at Sing Sing. Inmates were sent to the quarries to cut stone, or to the workshops where they made shoes, furniture, or prison uniforms. The labor was brutal but relentless. Some men worked until their hands bled, others until exhaustion collapsed them. Yet there was no sympathy. The philosophy of the time was simple: work builds character, punishment cleanses the soul. Punishments were severe and often cruel. Whippings, solitary confinement, and deprivation were common. Solitary cells, dark, airless boxes, were used to discipline those who disobeyed orders. Prisoners could be locked inside for days, even weeks, with nothing but bread and water. The silence that surrounded Sing Sing was not peaceful, it was the sound of fear. However, by the late 1800s and early 1900s, cracks began to appear in this system. Journalists, reformers, and religious leaders started questioning whether cruelty truly reformed men or merely destroyed them. Reports of abuse and torture inside Sing Sing reached the public, sparking outrage. Slowly, a movement for prison reform began to take shape. In the 20th century, Sing Sing became one of the first major American prisons to experiment with rehabilitation and education. Chaplains and teachers entered the facility, believing that faith and knowledge could reach even those condemned by society. The New York State Prison Association introduced literacy programs, workshops, and moral instruction. Over time, the prison established classrooms, a library, and vocational training, small steps toward humanizing life behind bars. One of the most significant shifts came under Louis E. Laws, who served as warden from 1920 to 1941. Laws transformed Sing Sing's image from a house of horror into a testing ground for reform. He believed that men could change, that even those who had done terrible things could rebuild themselves through discipline, education, and opportunity. Under his leadership, inmates began to participate in drama productions, athletic events, and educational lectures. Laws famously said, "There is good in every man, if only we can find it." For the first time, Sing Sing was not only a place of punishment but a place of possibility. The same walls that had once crushed spirits began to host classrooms, libraries, and chapel services. While the prison's reputation for brutality never fully disappeared, it began to stand for something more complex, a reflection of America's evolving view of justice itself. Few prisons in the world have left such a deep imprint on popular culture as Sing Correctional Facility. From newspaper headlines to Hollywood films, from novels to common expressions, the very name Sing Sing became more than a place. It became a symbol. It stood for crime and punishment, justice and fear, and the uneasy fascination society has always had with its outlaws. The phrase, "sent up the river," is one of Sing Sing's most lasting contributions to the American language. In the 19th century, criminals convicted in New York City were literally transported up the Hudson River to the prison in Ossining. The journey itself became a metaphor for downfall, a one-way trip from the noise of the city to the silence of the cell. Over time, the phrase took on a life of its own. Even today, when someone says a man has been sent up the river, it echoes the grim reality of those steamboats carrying prisoners to Sing Sing's iron gates nearly 2 centuries ago. By the early 1900s, Sing Sing had become a household name. Its reputation spread far beyond New York. Newspapers loved the drama of its executions and high-profile inmates. Headlines screamed of mobsters, murderers, and spies awaiting their fate in America's most famous prison. Journalists described the electric chair, Old Sparky, in lurid detail, feeding the public's morbid curiosity. To readers, Sing Sing was not just a building. It was a stage where the nation's darkest stories unfolded. Hollywood soon took notice. In the 1930s and 1940s, during the golden age of crime cinema, Sing Sing appeared again and again on the silver screen. Movies like 20,000 Years in Sing Sing, 1932, starring Spencer Tracy, brought the prison's grim atmosphere to life. The film, based on a book written by former warden Louis E. Laws, presented the prison as both a place of punishment and redemption, reflecting Laws's belief that even the worst men could find reform. That movie and others like it turned Sing Sing into a cultural icon, a backdrop for the timeless struggle between justice and humanity. The influence of Sing Sing extended into literature as well. Novelists, journalists, and playwrights used it as a symbol of confinement and consequence. Writers such as Jack London and Theodore Dreiser referenced it in their works, while countless crime thrillers and detective stories used Sing Sing as shorthand for doom. To many Americans, the name itself evoked emotion, fear, curiosity, and sometimes even admiration for the institution's grim endurance. Music, too, reflected its shadow. Blues and folk singers wrote ballads about men doing time in Sing Sing, their lyrics capturing the pain, regret, and longing that came from behind bars. For generations, the name carried a kind of dark poetry, the rhythm of steel doors closing, the hum of the river, the echo of footsteps down the last mile. Even as time passed, Sing Sing's legend adapted to new eras. In modern television and documentaries, it often appears as a symbol of America's complicated relationship with justice, a living reminder of how far the system has come and how far it still has to go. True crime shows and prison documentaries frequently return to its story, describing it as the prison that defined punishment. The cultural fascination with Sing Sing lies in its contradictions. It is both terrifying and fascinating, a place of death and discipline but also of redemption and reform. For many Americans, it represents the ultimate boundary between freedom and confinement, a physical and moral line that few dare to cross. Visitors who stand outside its massive gates today still feel that history pressing down. The name Sing Sing has outlived its founders, its wardens and its inmates. It survives in language, film, and memory, an echo from the past reminding society of its enduring struggle to balance justice with humanity. Today, more than 2 centuries after its founding, Sing Correctional Facility still stands on the banks of the Hudson River, a fortress of gray stone and history. While much of the world around it has changed, Sing Sing remains active, housing over 1,500 inmates in what is now classified as a maximum security prison. Yet, behind those towering walls, the spirit of the place has evolved. Once known for punishment and executions, Sing Sing has become a site of education, reform, and remembrance. A living museum of America's long and complex relationship with justice. The prison complex today is divided between the old cell blocks, which date back to the 19th century, and the more modern sections built in the 20th. The original cells, narrow, dark, and cold, still stand as a reminder of the brutal early years. Some of these have been preserved for historical tours and educational programs. Visitors who walk through them can almost hear the echoes of clanging gates and distant footsteps. The air carries a heavy sense of time, of stories that refuse to fade. Modern Sing Sing is far from the silent, punishing world it once was. Inmates now have access to educational and rehabilitation programs that would have been unimaginable to their predecessors. The Hudson Link for Higher Education in Prison, for instance, offers college courses and degrees to incarcerated men, helping them prepare for life after release. Many participants have gone on to earn bachelor's and master's degrees, proving that education can reach even through the thickest prison walls. The success of such programs has turned Sing Sing into a model for prison reform across the United States. Religious and community organizations have also become part of the modern Sing Sing experience. Chapels host interfaith services, and volunteers run workshops in writing, theater, and self-improvement. The prison's theater program, Voices from Within, allows inmates to perform plays that explore guilt, forgiveness, and transformation. These performances have drawn attention from educators, journalists, and even Broadway actors who see them as evidence of humanity's enduring potential for change. Outside the prison walls, another transformation is taking shape, one focused on preservation and education. Plans are underway to establish the Sing Sing Prison Museum, a $50 million project that will turn part of the historic facility into a public museum and learning center. The goal is not to glorify the prison's dark past, but to confront it, to tell the full story of American justice, from its harsh beginnings to its ongoing search for fairness and dignity. The museum will feature exhibits on the lives of inmates, the evolution of punishment, and the fight for reform. It will also preserve the original execution chamber and cell blocks, allowing visitors to experience history firsthand. For many, this transformation marks a turning point. Sing Sing is no longer seen purely as a symbol of cruelty or fear, but as a place of reflection, where the nation's mistakes and lessons can be studied. Historians and sociologists visit the site to understand how ideas of justice, punishment, and morality have evolved over time. Even the town of Ossining, once desperate to distance itself from the prison's reputation, now embraces its history, recognizing that Sing Sing is part of the community's identity and a crucial piece of New York's past. In recent decades, Sing Sing has also become a focus for criminal justice reform movements. Lawmakers, activists, and educators often cite its transformation as proof that prisons can change. It has hosted visits from governors, filmmakers, and human rights advocates, all eager to witness how one of America's most feared prisons became a center for hope and rehabilitation. Despite these reforms, Sing Sing remains what it has always been, a place of confinement, a world apart from freedom. But unlike the cold silence of its early years, today there is conversation, learning, and growth. The same river that once carried prisoners up the river, now carries a new current, one of reflection and renewal.